Good morning. Good morning, Royal We Fellowship. Shabbat Shalom. I'm happy that you are here. For those of you who would like to contribute as you join on or later on in the day, you can do so by finding the link up in the banner of this channel. We're going to go ahead and open up in prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, how holy is your name? And your kingdom will come, and your will shall be done here on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us of our sins as we forgive those who have sinned against us. Lead us not into temptation, and deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. And everybody says, amen. All right, now good morning, everybody. Now we have been on the journey in Genesis following Abraham and his journey to discover God's promise for his life. And now this is going to become an extremely important part of this message today in understanding the importance of Abraham. Let me turn the volume up here. And understanding the importance that Abraham understands that this journey that he's on is in fact because of God's promise. Abraham did not set out in life in order to fulfill his own promises that he had within himself. This is a key component to what we're about to read today. Many people struggle with this chapter. This is Genesis 22 that we are going to get into. For those of you who don't already know about Genesis 22, this is when Abraham is asked to do something that most people would consider so heartbreaking, so gut-wrenching, so crazy, so nonsensical that it almost makes it unbearable and difficult to read this chapter that we're about to read. But if we would take away our eyes from the way we perceive the world and the way we like to see things happen and the way in which we like to think that we are in somehow control of everything that happened and we make all these things happen. If we can take away that, let go of our grip, and we understand the importance of where Abraham knew he was coming from, which was walking an entire life based on God's promises, we can make sense somewhat out of this story, and we're going to attempt to do that right here on Royal We Fellowship. So Genesis 22, sometime later, God tested Abraham. Now, understand that it's a test. Okay, we're told that right off the bat, and just so that we know we have the framework of what's taking place here. So Genesis chapter 22, verse 1. Sometime later, God tested Abraham, said to him, Abraham. Abraham responded to God, said, here I am, he replied. Verse 2, then God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah, sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain that I will show you. Now, right away, the very first thing in the chapter we get is this absolute horror of what we would perceive, a promise that is now being asked to become a sacrifice. And this is something that we all struggle with. Number one, we look at this as Abraham's son, Isaac only, and that's the only way we can perceive this. And number two, it's just a horrible thing anyways. It doesn't make any sense. According to George Leo Haycock, every word in this astonishing command would have cut Abraham to the heart. And of course it would. It would have to you, and it would have to me as well. Especially for those of you who are parents, I am as well. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, in order to try to understand this, though, especially as it pertains to the test, because we are told in the beginning that God did say that sometime later God tested Abraham, we have to understand once again that Isaac was God's plan, not Abraham's. And this is right from the get-go. So if you recall, we know that God spoke to Abraham about what he would become and through whom. It was God the entire time that told Abraham, I will make you the father of many nations. And then it was also through him, this is an interesting one, the only part of the story that was Abraham's plan was Ishmael, and Ishmael was sent away. Now, if you know the story, if you recall, we read that Sarah and Abraham made this little pact, this agreement, and said, listen, we don't have any children. This isn't happening. Take the servant Hagar, my servant Hagar, and have a child with her. That was their plan. Ishmael was Sarah and Abraham's plan to have a child. And as a result of their plan, he was sent away. Now, this became God's plan. Isaac was God's plan. Isaac was the son that God came to Abraham and said, I'm going to make you the father of many nations, and it's going to be through Isaac. And then also, as we read in the last chapter, that it was God who then tended to Sarah, tended to her womb. And in a way, Abraham and Sarah did not believe that Sarah in her old age could even have a child. As a matter of fact, Sarah laughed, if you recall, and mocked the Lord. Am I going to have a child in my old age? Ha! She mocked. So the framework that we're looking at here is this understanding already that Abraham had, that there is no even indication that Isaac is Abraham's seed. This is written out as though it's a miracle birth, much like we see in the story of Jesus, how Mary was impregnated when the Lord visited and tended to Mary. Okay? And then Jesus was born. This is the same situation. So we're not even aware, based on what we've read so far, that Isaac is even the seed of Abraham. But we know that Abraham is to be the father, and we know that Isaac was born as a result of the Lord tending to Sarah. And Abraham knows this as well. Okay? Now, Abraham also, another point I want to bring up, Abraham was tested as to where his faith is in his journey. So if we recall, now we're seeing Abraham, this person leaving his home, he's venturing out, he's following this idea, this dream, this word that was spoken to him that he's going to be the father of many nations, okay? But oftentimes, and this is something we can all fall into, when we get this type of a promise, there comes a point where the promise is no longer dependent on God, but dependent on the things that are being set in front of us, okay? So, in other words, what I'm trying to say is that in this test, God wanted to make sure that Abraham understood that God was the one that was going to make him the father of many nations, not Isaac. God wanted to make sure that Abraham was not replacing his faith with Isaac. Isaac is now the one who's going to make me the father of many nations. And that would therefore then take Abraham's eyes off of the Lord, off of where it belongs, and put his eyes more onto Isaac, put all of his faith and his hope and his trust in his only son, Isaac. Now, a lot of us, this is important to understand because a lot of us live with this promise of inside of us. We have promises in life that involve other people. Promises of perhaps family, promises of marriage, promises of children, promises of friendships. We live with these promises, but too often we live with the promise because of the people instead of having the promise that we will have these things. So when we have these people in our lives, we hang on to them as though they are the ones that are fulfilling that promise. You're that promise, and now I'm going to hang on to. This creates toxicity, and not only that, but it creates a painful experience when that toxicity is then ripped away and we're unable to let go of that relationship. We're unable to let go of that dream or that idea. And because we believe that they were the only ones, they were the reason that promise was going to be had. It's not because the promise was ours to begin with. It's not because we believe we can have these things. It's because of those people. Those people are now that promise, okay? So there's a lot of things that we can learn here from what's taking place. Now, obviously, also, this would be a very prophetic enactment of the greatest story ever told, the one and only begotten son, right? Isaac is noted as Abraham's one and only begotten son. And also, we know that the greatest story ever told, the only begotten son, was Jesus, who was also born miraculously and who was also the father of many nations of hearts. We're talking about Christianity. and whom also was sacrificed, okay, but rose again. And this obviously is generations and generations away from taking place, but we're seeing this being prophesied in this very moment. We see that in God's heart, he understands what this type of sacrifice and what this is. He's trying to give us, you and me, the idea and the concept and the image early on, especially to the ancient Hebrew people who are reading. He's trying through the scriptures, the ancient people are trying to tell us something very important here, which is understand where your promises come from, understand what it is you are to hold on to in life, and understand that it is nothing physical. Nothing physical in this world is what is going to fulfill your promises in this life. Nothing physical in this world, not parents, children, marriage, spouse, friendships, is going to be the ones or anything that's going to fulfill your promises. Your promises are going to be fulfilled outside of that. And this is an important thing to understand. So moving on, verse 3. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and he loaded his donkey and took with him his servants and his son Isaac. So they rose up early the next morning. And on the third day, again, another prophetic, because we know that it was the third day after Jesus was crucified that he rose again. Here we see on the third day, verse 4, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servant, "Stay here with the donkey, and I and the boy are going to go over there. He will worship." Now, also, notice he said, "I and the boy" here. He did not use Isaac's name because at the moment, there was no joy in the situation. Now, Isaac, the name of Isaac meant joy. And right now, there's two things. Abraham understood that there is no joy in what is about to take place. This is something that cuts me to the core and really tests my faith and tests my trusting. Not only that, but he's also understanding by not calling him by name. He's also understanding that Isaac does not belong to him. Isaac does not belong to Abraham. This is something that again, we wrestle with when it comes to relationships and it comes to the pain that we feel when we have to separate from relationships. Part of this pain is understanding that we feel like they belong to us. We made them, we own them, we have them, we keep them. The reality is, and this comes down to even children, and I have to understand this too because I have children, is that I did not make them. Therefore, I'm responsible for them, but I do not own them. Something happens to them, they break. I can't fix them. I wouldn't know how. I don't know how they're woven together, right? But I'm responsible for them, and we have to take the responsibility role very seriously. But at this point in time, Abraham is acknowledging that he is not the owner, he is not the author, he is not the creator of Isaac. And he's no longer calling him by his name, he's now addressing him as the boy. So he says here, "Stay with the donkey, I and the boy are going to go over there, and we will worship, and then we will come back to you." And he also says, "We are going to go and we are going to worship." So he does not tell him that a sacrifice is even going to take place. He says that we are going to worship. And I just lost my notes. Where did they go? That's right. I'll get them back right over here. How did that happen? We'll get them back up here. Here we go. My screen is acting kind of funny. Here we go. I'll move it. Okay. And so Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering, and he placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife as the two of them went on together. Now, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, it said to Abraham, "Father." Abraham responded, "Yes, my son." "The fire and wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Now, this is interesting because Isaac was old enough to be able to speak and speak very well, speak elegantly, and even ask about where the offering is. He was at an age where he understood what sacrifice was. So many would say that he was in most likely his teens, so even into the 20s, to have a conversation with his father about sacrifice. And Abraham, and you can tell also with his answer, you could also tell the age of Isaac and what was going on, because in Abraham's answer, he said something that is very profound and something that a mature believer, someone of faith, would understand. Abraham's response was, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. And so the two of them went together, both of them in trust that God would provide the lamb for the burnt offering. When they reached the place, verse 9, that God told him about, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac on it, laid him on the altar on top of the wood, and then he reached out his hand and took a knife to begin the sacrifice. But an angel of the Lord called out from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. And Abraham said, Here I am. Verse 12, do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. So once again, we see that this was a test, and I'm under the impression that Abraham also understood the test aspect of this. Okay, we cannot dismiss that. The test was an understanding that God was the author and God was going to, the provider of the promise to Abraham. Isaac was not the promise. Isaac was not the one who was making the promise to Abraham. Does that make sense? Isaac was not the one that was making the promise to Abraham. God was. So this was the test. And then Abraham looked up, verse 13, and saw in a thicket, he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over, took the ram, sacrificed it together with Isaac as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, the Lord will provide. And to this day, it is said, on that mountain of the Lord, it will be provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations of the earth will be blessed, because you have obeyed me. So then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba, and Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Now later, sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She bore 2 sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, the firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kemuel, Kezed, Hazo, Pedesh, Jidlaph, and Bethuel. And there's all kinds of names that I do not quite understand. So we're going to end right there. But we're going to start to see the progression of the family that is being born. So we see here in the end of what we are reading, verse 15 here, that the angel did say that once again, that declares the Lord, because you've done this, that God is going to bless Abraham and make sure that his family, and he is the father, and his descendants are numerous. Again, we see that the whole point of the test was to get Abraham and get us, the ancient people, trying to tell us to understand something, that the promises that we have in our heart, though we want so badly to grab onto these things, thinking that that's the promise that's fulfilled, and that is the only way the promise is going to be fulfilled. Instead, we loosen that up and we understand that our promises, especially if we are living a life of faith, come from above. And when we let go of our grabbing onto the things that come into this life and taking it in as ours, we then allow God to fulfill the promises that he's given us. Again, if we are fighting and we are making our own promises with what's in front of us, then we stop, according to this ancient story, we stop God from being able to bless us with his promises. And that was the point of this test. And that is what we can get out of this. And with that, I'm going to thank you for being a part of Royal We Fellowship this morning. This is a very difficult one. It's very difficult to understand this, and also how to somehow navigate this and tie this into something that you and I can understand, especially understanding this world of toxicity. But I do hope that as you read through this and you start to understand something, your heart can start to go in that direction of understanding the importance of not hanging on so tightly to anything in this life, and being able to understand where our promises come from. If we can understand where our promises come from, then we will not be broken hearted at the toxicity that we face in this world, because we'll stop trying to put our promises in the hands of other people who are toxic and instead bring our promises back to a place where they can truly come from in life, and that is from the Lord. And as I said before, if you would like to be a contributor, if you would like to help out, you can donate through PayPal on the link in the banner of this channel. Again, donations are not required but inspired if you would like to help. There's all kinds of new things for you to be aware of as well. You can visit Royal We Apparel. There's a shop now open where you can find encouraging sayings and shirts. You can find that on the Organic Royal We channel in the description box. And be sure to know that Monday night is Royal We Live Chat. Bring your questions, especially if you have questions pertaining to this. And with that, I will see you next Saturday right here on Royal We Fellowship. Have a blessed weekend, everybody.